"Step out of the car, son," the officer demanded, smirking at his partner. "Let's see if this fancy BMW matches the driver." Terrell Mason calmly pulled out his phone, started recording, and then reached for his wallet. The officer's expression froze when he saw the Presidential Medal of Freedom pin attached to it. "What exactly are you implying about me, Officer Jenkins?" Terrell asked calmly. The officer's body cam was recording everything, a fact he'd soon desperately wish wasn't true. Manhattan's exclusive Upper East Side glistened in the late afternoon sun as luxury vehicles crawled through the Friday traffic. Among them was 32-year-old Terrell Mason, driving his recently purchased BMW after winning a landmark civil rights case at the Supreme Court. His life's work advocating for racial justice had earned him recognition from presidents and celebrities alike. Yet to Officer Jenkins, he was just another black man in an expensive car, someone who must have borrowed it. If you're enjoying this story so far, make sure to like and subscribe. I'd love to know which city you're watching from. Drop it in the comments below. What began as a routine drive home quickly spiraled into something far more consequential when Officer Jenkins pulled Terrell over, claiming he'd run a stop sign, one that didn't exist on that street. As the officer approached the window, his hand resting casually on his holster, he couldn't contain his smirk. "Nice car. Your boss let you borrow it for the weekend?" The comment hung in the air, its racist implication unmistakable. What Officer Jenkins didn't realize was that Terrell Mason wasn't just any driver. He was the youngest partner at Williams and Hargrove, with 3 Supreme Court victories under his belt and connections throughout the justice system. The situation escalated when Officer Miller, Jenkins' partner, joined in with comments about probable cause and how these neighborhoods have standards. Neither officer noticed the Harvard Law School emblem on Terrell's laptop bag in the passenger seat, nor did they recognize his face from his recent Time magazine cover story. What they saw was determined by prejudice. Nothing more, nothing less. The dashcam continued recording as Jenkins ordered Terrell out of the car for a routine check, his tone suggesting there was nothing routine about it. As Terrell stood silently by his car, hands visible as years of survival instinct had taught him, he made mental notes of every procedural violation. He knew the law better than those supposedly enforcing it, and beneath his calm exterior, something powerful was building. Not just anger, but strategic resolve. This wouldn't be just another incident to report and forget. This would become a reckoning. Could a single traffic stop really change the culture of an entire police department? Would Officer Jenkins' casual racism finally face consequences when confronted with the full force of the law wielded by someone who had mastered it? And what price would justice demand? Manhattan's Upper East Side represented everything America's wealth disparity had created. Immaculate brownstones and doorman buildings where the nation's elite resided, just miles from neighborhoods struggling with underfunded schools and over-policed streets. Terrell Mason understood both worlds intimately. Raised in the Bronx by a single mother who worked 3 jobs, his journey to becoming one of America's most respected civil rights attorneys was anything but typical. Officer Derek Jenkins came from Staten Island, 3rd-generation NYPD, raised on stories of his father's and grandfather's tough policing in the bad old days. At 38, he'd spent 15 years on the force. The last 5 partnered with Officer Ryan Miller, a younger, quieter cop who rarely questioned Jenkins' approach to policing certain neighborhoods and certain drivers. "License and registration," Jenkins repeated, his flashlight deliberately shining into Terrell's eyes rather than at the documents being presented. "Is there a problem with how I'm providing them?" Terrell asked calmly, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "Just making sure everything's in order," Jenkins replied. "Nice suit. Must have cost a pretty penny." Officer Miller shifted uncomfortably behind his partner. This wasn't their first stop like this. Usually the drivers were intimidated, sometimes argumentative, but never as composed as this man. "Harvard Law," Miller muttered, noticing the emblem on the bag. Something about this situation felt wrong, but his loyalty to his partner kept him silent. The Manhattan skyline provided a dramatic backdrop to this tension-filled scene. Just blocks away, the offices of Williams and Hargrove occupied 3 floors of a prestigious building where Terrell had spent that very morning preparing for a class-action lawsuit against, ironically, law enforcement agencies for racial profiling. "Where'd you get this car, son?" Jenkins asked, emphasizing the last word, despite Terrell being well into his 30s. "I purchased it," Terrell replied. And I'm not your son. You know, attitude like that makes me wonder if we shouldn't take a closer look at you in this vehicle. Jenkins's casual disregard for protocol was nothing new to his precinct. The 19th precinct had faced 3 formal complaints in the past year alone, all mysteriously dismissed before reaching disciplinary boards. Captain Laura Stevens had warned Jenkins about his methods just last week, but with his uncle serving as a deputy commissioner, consequences rarely materialized. What Jenkins couldn't know was that Terrell sat on the Citizen Oversight Committee that had been established 6 months ago to address exactly these types of incidents. Commissioner Richardson had personally asked Terrell to join after his groundbreaking work on police reform legislation. Down the street, Alicia Washington, an associate at Terrell's firm and his mentee, was walking back from court when she noticed the stop. A former public defender, she instinctively slowed her pace, recognizing the all-too-familiar sight of a black man surrounded by police. When she realized it was Terrell, she immediately began documenting the scene on her phone. "Everything all right, Terrell?" she called out, making her presence known. The officers turned, suddenly aware they had an audience. Miller's posture changed immediately, becoming more professional, while Jenkins merely cast an annoyed glance her way. "Ms. Washington," Terrell acknowledged formally. "These officers seem convinced I've committed a traffic violation on a street with no stop signs." Alicia's presence changed the dynamic instantly. As a black woman in a power suit carrying a legal briefcase emblazoned with their firm's prestigious logo, she represented another challenge to Jenkins' worldview. "I don't believe we need any interference," Jenkins stated flatly. "I'm not interfering, officer, I'm observing," Alicia replied, her tone matching Terrell's calm professionalism. "As is my right under the law." Jenkins' radio crackled with another call, providing a convenient interruption to what was becoming an increasingly complicated stop. His instincts told him these weren't typical troublemakers, but his pride prevented him from simply acknowledging his mistake. "Now you can put your phone away," Jenkins snapped at Alicia. "This is a police matter." "Actually, Officer Jenkins," Terrell interrupted, noting the name from the badge, "citizens have a constitutionally protected right to record police activity in public spaces. The Second Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed this in Glick v. Cunniff, and the Supreme Court declined to hear challenges to that ruling, effectively making it settled law." Jenkins blinked, momentarily thrown by the precise legal citation. Most people he stopped didn't quote case law. "Look, I don't need a street lawyer telling me how to do my job," Jenkins recovered, his voice rising. "I've been enforcing the law for 15 years. "And yet," Terrell replied evenly, "you seem unfamiliar with Terry v. Ohio, which established that traffic stops require reasonable suspicion of an actual violation. There is no stop sign on this street, which means this entire detention lacks legal foundation." Officer Miller shifted uncomfortably. Unlike his partner, he recognized the growing danger of the situation. The composed confidence of both Terrell and Alicia suggested they weren't bluffing about their legal knowledge. "Partner," Miller murmured, Maybe you should let me handle this." Jenkins cut him off before turning back to Terrell. "Step away from the vehicle. We're going to conduct a search." "On what grounds?" Terrell challenged, still recording. "You've established no probable cause, and I do not consent to any search of my person or vehicle." The confrontation was drawing attention now. 2 pedestrians had stopped to watch, phones raised. A woman in a nearby building had opened her window, clearly recording the scene unfolding on her street. What had begun as a routine harassment was quickly becoming a very public display of police overreach. Jenkins, sensing his authority slipping, reached for Terrell's arm. "That's it. You're interfering with police business." The moment Jenkins' hand made contact with Terrell's suit jacket, Alicia's voice cut through the tension. "Officer Jenkins, badge number 45721. You are now committing battery and false imprisonment of Terrell Mason, senior partner at Williams & Hargrove, and special advisor to the Attorney General's Office on Civil Rights Enforcement." Jenkins froze, his hand still on Terrell's sleeve. "Additionally," she continued, "as legal counsel present at this scene, I'm informing you that this entire interaction is being live-streamed to our firm's social media accounts, where approximately 20,000 followers, including several journalists and the District Attorney's Office, are watching in real time." This was a bluff. She had been recording, not live-streaming, but Jenkins had no way of knowing that. His face paled visibly. Officer Miller had already taken 2 steps back, his hands conspicuously away from his weapon. Unlike Jenkins, he recognized the name Williams and Hargrove, the prestigious firm that had successfully sued 3 police departments in high-profile misconduct cases over the past year. "Mr. Mason," Miller said, his tone dramatically different, "there seems to be a misunderstanding." "Indeed," Terrell replied, gently but firmly removing Jenkins' hand from his sleeve. "A misunderstanding that began when your partner decided my appearance didn't match my vehicle, continued when he implied I must have stolen it, and is now culminating in an illegal detention and attempted search." Jenkins, finally sensing the depth of trouble he'd walked into, attempted damage control. "Now hold on, nobody said anything about stealing." "Except you did," Terrell interrupted, rewinding his phone recording. Quote, "Your boss let you borrow it for the weekend, implying I couldn't possibly own this vehicle, followed by questioning where I got this car, with clear emphasis suggesting impropriety. A black SUV with government plates pulled to the curb, the window lowered to reveal Fernando Rodriguez, the recently appointed U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York." "Everything all right, Terrell? We're still on for dinner at the governor's residence, right?" Rodriguez called out, immediately comprehending the situation with the practiced eye of a former civil rights prosecutor. "Need me to make any calls?" Jenkins looked like he might be sick. Officer Miller had already retreated to their patrol car, suddenly very interested in checking their dashboard computer. "That won't be necessary, Fernando," Terrell replied calmly. "Officers Jenkins and Miller were just concluding our interaction. I believe they now understand this stop was unwarranted." The dynamics had shifted completely. What began as 2 officers exerting power over someone they perceived as vulnerable had transformed into something very different, a reckoning with consequences that would extend far beyond this street corner. As Terrell straightened his jacket and prepared to return to his car, he fixed Jenkins with a steady gaze. "Officer, I'll see you again soon, though under rather different circumstances. Your precinct has had 17 complaints of racial profiling in the past year. Tomorrow morning that file crosses my desk as part of the Federal Oversight Committee's review." He handed Jenkins his business card. "You might want to secure legal representation." By midnight, the video of Terrell's traffic stop had gone viral. Justice for Terrell and Hard Officer Jenkins were trending on every social platform. News vans lined the street outside the 19th precinct, where Captain Laura Stevens was holding an emergency meeting with her command staff. This wasn't just another complaint. This was a potential department-wide crisis. "How the hell did this happen?" Stevens demanded, slamming a tablet displaying the viral video onto the conference table. "Jenkins, we just had a conversation about this kind of stop last week." Jenkins sat rigid in his chair, union representative already by his side. "Captain, the video doesn't show the full context." "The context?" Stevens interrupted. "The context is that you harassed a Harvard-educated attorney who sits on the Police Oversight Committee, has argued before the Supreme Court, and has the personal cell numbers of both the Attorney General and the Mayor. What possible context makes that okay?" Across town in his Upper West Side apartment, Terrell sat with Alicia and 3 other colleagues from Williams and Hargrove, strategizing their approach. What had begun as a personal indignity had become something much larger, an opportunity to create lasting change. "The Commissioner's office called twice," said Marcus Winters, the firm's managing partner. "They're offering a personal apology, immediate suspension of both officers, and a review of precinct policies." Terrell shook his head. "That's not enough. We've heard these promises before. This isn't about me or those 2 officers. It's about systemic issues." Meanwhile, in a small apartment in Queens, Officer Ryan Miller sat with his wife Sarah, watching the unfolding news coverage with growing dread. "I should have said something," Miller whispered. "I knew it was wrong the moment Jenkins started questioning him." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Then say something now. If I speak against Jenkins, my career is over. You know how the department treats whistleblowers." "And if you don't?" Sarah challenged. "Can you live with yourself?" This crisis was creating unexpected fault lines throughout the NYPD. Commissioner Richardson faced pressure from City Hall to take decisive action, while simultaneously receiving calls from the police union urging caution and due process. The mayor, facing re-election in 6 months, recognized the political dynamite in his hands. By morning, a new complexity emerged. Journalists had uncovered that Officer Jenkins' uncle, Deputy Commissioner Frank Sullivan, had buried 3 previous complaints against his nephew. Sullivan was a powerful figure in the department, with aspirations for the commissioner's position. The scandal threatened not just Jenkins' career, but the department's leadership structure. At Williams and Hargrove, another dimension of the case was forming. Carlos Menendez, a data analyst at the firm, had been compiling statistics on the 19th precinct for months as part of their ongoing civil rights work. "Look at these numbers," Carlos said, displaying charts on the conference room screen. "The 19th precinct has stopped black drivers at 8 times the rate of white drivers over the past year, despite the neighborhood demographics. And look who signed off on these patrol patterns. Captain Stevens herself." "So the captain's hands aren't clean either," Alicia observed. "No wonder she's scrambling now." Terrell considered this information carefully. "This goes deeper than Jenkins or even Stevens. This is departmental culture." A knock at the door interrupted them. Fernando Rodriguez entered, looking grave. "The U.S. Attorney's Office just received a whistleblower complaint," he said. "Someone inside the 19th precinct is alleging that racial profiling isn't just tolerated, it's encouraged through an unofficial quota system. Officers with the most productive stops get preferred assignments and overtime." "Do we know who the whistleblower is?" Terrell asked. "Not yet," Rodriguez replied, "but they've provided documentation, internal emails, patrol assignments, performance reviews that mention proactive policing in problem areas as a metric for advancement." The case was expanding beyond a single incident into something that could reshape policing in the entire city. For Terrell, the personal had become political in ways he hadn't anticipated. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Saw you on the news. Are you okay?" The simple question grounded him amid the growing storm. "We need to be strategic," Terrell finally said. "This isn't just about punishing Jenkins. It's about changing the system that created him." 3 days after the incident, Terrell Mason stood before a bank of microphones outside City Hall. Camera flashes punctuated the tense atmosphere as journalists jostled for position. Behind him stood a diverse coalition, fellow attorneys from his firm, civil rights leaders, community organizers, and most surprisingly, a small group of NYPD officers in civilian clothes. "What happened to me was not unusual," Terrell began, his voice steady and measured. "It was not an aberration or the actions of one bad apple. What was unusual was that I had the resources, knowledge, and platform to respond. Thousands of New Yorkers face similar treatment every day without these advantages." The crowd fell silent as Terrell revealed what his firm had been working on for months before his encounter with Jenkins. Today, Williams and Hargrove is filing a class action lawsuit against the New York Police Department, specifically targeting documented patterns of racial profiling across multiple precincts. Our evidence includes statistical analysis of stop data, internal communications suggesting racial bias in enforcement priorities, and testimony from over 200 citizens who have experienced similar treatment. The announcement sent shockwaves through the assembled press. This wasn't just about one incident, it was a comprehensive legal challenge to NYPD practices. Additionally, Terrell continued, "We are joined today by current and former officers who have bravely chosen to come forward with evidence of systematic discrimination within department practices." A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd as Officer Ryan Miller stepped forward to the microphones. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice was firm. "My name is Officer Ryan Miller. For 5 years I've worked in the 19th precinct, and for 5 years I've watched as officers, including myself, were incentivized to make stops based on racial profiles rather than legitimate public safety concerns." Miller paused, swallowing hard. "I was present during Mr. Mason's unlawful detention. I did nothing to stop it. My silence made me complicit, and I can no longer live with that complicity." 4 other officers joined Miller at the microphones, each sharing similar experiences from different precincts. Their testimony painted a damning picture of departmental culture that rewarded discriminatory policing and punished those who questioned it. The lawsuit's filing coincided with another bombshell. An anonymous source within the department had leaked a trove of emails and internal memos to the New York Times. These documents revealed that Deputy Commissioner Sullivan had explicitly directed precinct captains to increase stops in high-value areas, a euphemism for wealthy neighborhoods, with special attention to non-resident profiles, which in practice meant people of color who didn't look like they belonged. Commissioner Richardson, blindsided by both the lawsuit and the leaks, called an emergency press conference where he announced Sullivan's immediate suspension pending investigation and the formation of an independent review board to examine departmental practices. At NYPD headquarters, chaos reigned. Officers were divided between those defending the status quo and others who saw an opportunity for long overdue reform. Captain Stevens found herself caught in the middle, her own emails regarding enforcement priorities now public, and her career hanging in the balance. The turning point wasn't just institutional, it was personal for all involved. Terrell, who had built his career fighting systemic injustice, now found himself the reluctant face of a movement. His phone rang constantly with interview requests, and his social media following had exploded overnight. For Officer Jenkins, the consequences were immediate and severe. Placed on unpaid leave and abandoned by his uncle's protection, he faced not only departmental charges, but potential criminal prosecution for civil rights violations. His 15-year career lay in ruins around him. Miller, having crossed the thin blue line, received death threats along with messages of support. His decision to become a whistleblower had forever changed his life and his family's. Sarah had taken their children to stay with her parents upstate after someone had spray-painted "traitor" on their apartment door. That evening, Terrell received an unexpected visitor at his office. Commissioner Richardson himself, without entourage or press. "You could have handled this differently," Richardson said, taking the seat offered to him. "A private conversation, internal channels. Would anything have actually changed?" Terrell countered. Richardson was silent for a moment. "Probably not," he finally admitted. "The system protects itself." "Then you understand why this needed to be public?" Richardson nodded slowly. "What do you want, Mr. Mason?" "Really want?" "Systemic change," Terrell replied without hesitation. "Not promises or policies that fade after the headlines do. Real, measurable, lasting change." "That kind of change makes enemies," Richardson warned. "I'm aware," Terrell said. "But it also creates allies in unexpected places." He slid a folder across the desk. "These are our proposed reforms. They're comprehensive but implementable. The question is, Commissioner, are you going to be part of the problem or part of the solution?" Richardson opened the folder, the weight of history and possibility hanging in the balance. The fallout was swift and far-reaching. Within a week of filing the lawsuit, Williams and Hargrove had received over 500 additional testimonials from citizens who had experienced similar profiling. The mayor, sensing political winds shifting, announced the formation of a task force on police reform, with Terrell Mason invited as co-chair. At the 19th precinct, Officer Jenkins' locker had been cleared out, his badge and service weapon surrendered. The department had moved quickly to distance itself from him, painting him as an outlier, rather than a symptom of deeper problems. His police union representative advised him to maintain absolute silence, as both internal affairs and the district attorney's office investigated potential criminal charges. Captain Stevens faced her own reckoning. While not fired outright, she had been reassigned to administrative duties pending review. Her previously stellar career now hinged on whether she could convincingly argue that she was following orders rather than actively promoting discriminatory practices. For Officer Miller, life had become complicated in different ways. Half his former colleagues wouldn't speak to him, the other half quietly expressed support when no one was listening. He'd been transferred to desk duty for his protection, while continuing to provide evidence for both the lawsuit and the internal investigation. "Do you regret coming forward?" Terrell asked him during a preparation session for his deposition. Miller considered the question carefully. "My kids asked me last week what integrity means. For the first time in years, I could answer them honestly and feel like I was living that answer. So no, I don't regret it." The media coverage remained intense. Opinion pieces debated whether this was a watershed moment for police reform or an overreaction to a single incident. Cable news panels featured heated exchanges between police defenders and civil rights advocates. Terrell found himself repeatedly explaining that the goal wasn't to demonize police, but to ensure equal protection under the law for all citizens. Deputy Commissioner Sullivan had retreated to his vacation home in the Hamptons, refusing all comment as investigators combed through his communications and directives. His attorney released a statement claiming Sullivan was being scapegoated for department-wide practices that predated his tenure. One unexpected consequence emerged when several major donors to the Police Foundation threatened to withdraw their support unless meaningful reforms were implemented. Corporate sponsors, concerned about brand association with discriminatory practices, began pressuring city leadership for transparent changes. The lawsuit also exposed rifts within the NYPD itself. A group calling themselves Officers for Equitable Policing formed, openly supporting reforms. Their existence challenged the narrative that criticism of police practices was inherently anti-police. Alicia Washington took the lead in coordinating the expanding class action, working 18-hour days to organize testimonials and evidence. "This is why I became a lawyer," she told Terrell during a rare quiet moment. "Not for corporate mergers or tax avoidance strategies, but for this, using the law as a tool for justice." For Terrell personally, the consequences were complex. His higher profile brought increased security concerns. Death threats from those who viewed him as attacking law enforcement were taken seriously enough that the firm hired protection for key staff. Yet it also brought opportunities to amplify his message about systematic reform. His mother, watching her son navigate the growing storm, reminded him of something important during their weekly Sunday dinner. "Remember why you're doing this," she said, serving him the same comfort food she'd made throughout his childhood. "It's not about headlines or even winning the lawsuit. It's about that boy you were getting stopped by police while walking home from the library. It's about making sure another generation doesn't grow up with that fear." 6 weeks after the incident, the first official response to the lawsuit came. The commissioner announced a comprehensive review of stop procedures, immediate retraining for officers in anti-bias policing, and the implementation of a civilian review process with actual enforcement power. These were promising first steps. But Terrell knew from experience that announcements were easy. Institutional change was hard. The real work was just beginning. As he prepared for a crucial court hearing on the class certification, Terrell received an unexpected email from Officer Jenkins' personal account. "I want to talk. No lawyers. Just you and me. There are things you need to know about how deep this really goes." Terrell stared at the message, weighing the risks against the potential for breakthrough. Whatever Jenkins wanted to reveal could either be a trap or the key to truly transformative change. Terrell sat in a quiet corner booth at Riverside Diner, a nondescript establishment far from both the courthouse and police headquarters. He'd chosen this location carefully, public enough to be safe, anonymous enough to avoid media attention. The bell above the door jingled as Jenkins entered, looking dramatically different from their first encounter. Gone was the imposing uniform and confident swagger, replaced by civilian clothes and the hunched posture of a man under tremendous pressure. "I appreciate you meeting me," Jenkins said, sliding into the booth. His voice lacked its former authority. "I'm here to listen," Terrell replied neutrally, recording device discreetly activated in his pocket, legal in New York as single-party consent was sufficient. Jenkins stared into his coffee. "I was following orders, not just general culture. Specific directives. Sullivan instituted a quota system 3 years ago. Officers who didn't make enough quality stops in wealthy neighborhoods were denied overtime given undesirable shifts." Quality stops? That's the euphemism. It meant people who didn't belong in those neighborhoods. We all knew what it meant. "And, Captain Stevens?" She protested initially, but Sullivan made it clear her promotion depended on compliance. Eventually, she started pushing us just as hard as Sullivan pushed her. As Jenkins continued revealing the departmental hierarchy of discrimination, Terrell recognized both the value of this testimony and the challenge it presented. Jenkins wasn't seeking redemption. He wanted immunity. His cooperation came with expectations of leniency that Terrell wasn't sure he deserved. Meanwhile, Officer Miller faced escalating consequences for his whistleblowing. His wife had been let go from her administrative job at the police union, officially for budget reasons. But the timing left little doubt about the real motivation. Their children faced bullying at school from classmates whose parents were officers. The thin blue line had become a wall of ostracism around his family. Despite these challenges, Miller continued providing crucial evidence. "My father was an officer," he told Terrell during a preparation session. "He always said the badge means protecting people, all people. I'm trying to honor that, even if it costs me everything." At Williams and Hargrove, Alicia was coordinating with community organizations to document patterns across precincts. The case had expanded beyond the original lawsuit, becoming a comprehensive challenge to policing practices citywide. Her team had identified troubling connections between enforcement patterns and real estate development. Areas being gentrified showed the highest increases in discriminatory stops. "This isn't just about bias," she explained during a strategy meeting. "It's about economic displacement. Increased policing makes long-time residents feel unwelcome, accelerating neighborhood turnover." For Terrell, the greatest challenge was maintaining focus amid growing public attention. National news outlets requested interviews daily. Civil rights organizations wanted him as a keynote speaker. Politicians sought photo opportunities. Each request promised greater visibility for the cause, but threatened to distract from the methodical legal work needed for lasting change. "You can't be everywhere," Marcus reminded him after Terrell's third consecutive 18-hour day. "Choose your battles strategically." The lawsuit faced its own obstacles. The city's legal department filed motion after motion, seeking to limit the scope of discovery, arguing that department-wide communications were protected by various privileges. Judge Eleanor Simmons, known for her meticulous approach, denied most of these motions, but established strict parameters for the case that created additional procedural hurdles. Despite these challenges, momentum continued building. More officers came forward with evidence, each requiring careful vetting and protection. Community meetings organized to gather testimonials regularly exceeded venue capacity. A groundswell of public support was building that even skeptical political figures couldn't ignore. The most significant breakthrough came when Terrell's team obtained internal communications, revealing that the Enhanced Enforcement Initiative, targeting wealthy neighborhoods, had been explicitly designed to maintain neighborhood character. Legal jargon that barely disguised its discriminatory intent. Commissioner Richardson, seeing the direction of both public opinion and mounting evidence, requested a private meeting with Terrell and the mayor. The opportunity for systematic change was crystallizing, though obstacles remained substantial. "They'll try to settle with cosmetic changes," Alicia warned, "window dressing that looks good in press releases, but changes nothing substantively." Terrell nodded, understanding the challenge ahead. "Then we need to make the cost of superficial reform higher than the cost of real change." Part 8. Preparing for the climax, 800 words. The courthouse steps were crowded with media and spectators as Terrell arrived for the pivotal hearing that would determine whether Judge Simmons would certify the case as a class action. This critical procedural hurdle would transform the lawsuit from an individual complaint into a powerful legal mechanism representing thousands of affected citizens. The city's attorneys had fought vigorously against this classification, knowing it would dramatically increase both their legal exposure and public pressure. Inside, the wood-paneled courtroom hummed with tension. The city had deployed a team of 6 attorneys led by Sharon Winters, a formidable litigator, with a reputation for aggressive defense of municipal clients. Terrell and Alicia were joined by Marcus and 2 other partners, matching the city's show of force. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Simmons entered, her reputation for no-nonsense efficiency evident in her brisk approach to the bench. For 2 hours, both sides presented arguments about whether the experiences of various plaintiffs constituted a pattern justifying class certification. The city's strategy focused on presenting each incident as unique and disconnected, unfortunate isolated events, rather than evidence of systematic discrimination. When it was Terrell's turn to speak, he approached the podium with the quiet confidence that had become his trademark. "Your Honor, the question before this court is whether these thousands of incidents represent random coincidence or systematic practice. The statistical evidence is unambiguous. Black and Latino citizens are stopped at rates 8 times higher than white citizens in identical circumstances. This disparity persists across precincts, across years, and across different commanding officers. This is not coincidence, it's policy." As Terrell presented the evidence, including testimony from Officer Miller and the revelations from Jenkins, Judge Simmons listened intently, occasionally asking piercing questions that suggested she was tracking the implications carefully. Outside the courtroom, parallel developments were unfolding. Commissioner Richardson, recognizing that the department was likely to lose both in court and in public opinion, had been working with his reform-minded officers to develop a comprehensive proposal for departmental transformation. His career had been built on maintaining the status quo, but facing retirement within 2 years, he was increasingly concerned about his legacy. Deputy Commissioner Sullivan, sensing the shifting winds, had begun approaching friendly media outlets with a counter-narrative, portraying himself as a dedicated public servant, being scapegoated for implementing policies that elected officials had tacitly approved for years. His strategy was clear. If he was going down, he wouldn't go alone. The mayor, caught between police unions threatening political consequences and community activists demanding accountability, was searching for a middle path that would allow him to claim victory without alienating either constituency, a nearly impossible needle to thread. As these forces converged, Officer Miller received an unexpected visitor at his temporary desk assignment in records management. Captain Stevens, herself reassigned to administrative duties, approached awkwardly. "Got a minute?" she asked, the authority gone from her voice. They walked to a quiet corner of the building. Stevens looked older than she had just months ago, the stress etching new lines around her eyes. "I've been thinking about what you did," she said finally. "Coming forward." Miller waited, expecting recrimination. "My father was an officer too," Stevens continued, "back in the 70s. He told me stories, how they'd get orders to clean up neighborhoods before politicians visited, which meant sweeping up anyone who didn't look presentable. He hated it, but followed orders." She paused, struggling with decades of ingrained loyalty to the department. "I told myself I was different, but when Sullivan's directives came down, I did the same thing, followed orders I knew were wrong. The difference is, you had the courage I didn't." She handed him a flash drive. Internal communications going back 5 years. Performance evaluations explicitly rewarding officers for discriminatory enforcement. The whole system documented. Miller stared at the small device. "Why now?" "Because right is right," Stevens said simply. "Too late, maybe, but better than never." As the hearing concluded, Judge Simmons announced she would rule on class certification within the week. Both sides understood that this decision would fundamentally shape the case's trajectory. That evening, Terrell received 3 significant calls in quick succession. First, from the mayor's office, requesting a confidential meeting to discuss resolution frameworks. Second, from a journalist at the New York Times, seeking comment on Sullivan's planned press conference, where he would allegedly implicate several elected officials in directing discriminatory policing. Third, from Officer Miller, explaining the unexpected evidence Captain Stevens had provided. The pieces were aligning for a decisive confrontation. The system that had enabled and protected discriminatory policing for decades was fracturing under pressure, with various participants now calculating whether to reform, deflect blame, or fight to maintain the status quo. Terrell gathered his core team at the office to prepare for what would likely be the most consequential week of their case. "They're splintering," Alicia observed, "everyone looking to protect themselves, which creates both opportunity and risk," Terrell replied. "We need to be ready for anything." The wood-paneled conference room on the 40th floor of City Hall had witnessed countless negotiations over the decades, but few as momentous as this one. Around the massive table sat representatives of all the principal forces in the unfolding drama. Mayor Daniels at the head, flanked by his legal counsel, Commissioner Richardson and his reform committee, Terrell and his legal team, representatives from community organizations, and notably Officer Miller alongside 4 other officers who had come forward with evidence. Conspicuously absent was Deputy Commissioner Sullivan, whose scheduled press conference had been abruptly cancelled after a private conversation with the district attorney, the contents of which remained confidential but had resulted in Sullivan's immediate retirement announcement. "Let's be clear about why we're here," Mayor Daniels began, his political instincts evident in his carefully calibrated tone. "Not to assign blame or revisit past grievances, but to chart a path forward that serves all New Yorkers." Terrell resisted the urge to object to this framing. The moment called for strategic patience, not righteous indignation. Commissioner Richardson spoke next, surprising everyone with his directness. "The department I've served for 38 years has failed significant portions of our community, not occasionally or accidentally, but systematically and by design." He paused, the admission clearly difficult. "I bear responsibility for that failure. So does everyone in department leadership." The commissioner slid a document across the table. The comprehensive reform proposal his team had developed, significantly more substantive than anyone had anticipated. "This isn't window dressing," Richardson continued. "This is fundamental restructuring of how we recruit, train, deploy, and hold accountable our officers. The proposal included independent oversight, with disciplinary authority, complete restructuring of performance metrics to eliminate incentives for discriminatory stops, mandatory body cameras with civilian review of footage, and perhaps most significantly, reallocation of substantial resources from enforcement to community service and mental health response teams. As discussion proceeded, the fragile coalition of interests became evident. Police union representatives, invited as observers, grew increasingly agitated as the scope of changes became clear. Community advocates pushed for even more comprehensive reforms. The mayor's team kept emphasizing balanced approaches and phased implementation, political language for diluting and delaying change. 3 hours into negotiations, with progress stalling amid competing interests, Terrell finally played his most powerful card. "Before we continue, I want to be transparent about something," he said, opening his laptop. "Tomorrow morning, the New York Times will publish this comprehensive investigation." He displayed the front-page preview their media contacts had provided, a devastating exposé titled "Policed by Profile: Inside New York's Discriminatory Enforcement Machine." The article combined statistical analysis, officer testimonials, internal documents, and affected citizens' stories into an irrefutable indictment of departmental practices. "Simultaneously, we'll be filing this amended complaint with Judge Simmons," Alicia added, distributing copies of a document that included Captain Stevens's evidence and testimony from 12 additional officers who had come forward. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Fighting this battle in court and the court of public opinion would be catastrophically damaging to the department, the current administration, and individual careers. Mayor Daniels, a skilled politician, recognized the moment for what it was. "I believe we should take a short recess to review these materials," he suggested, his expression making clear he understood the new power dynamics. When negotiations resumed an hour later, the tone had changed dramatically. Obstructionist positions gave way to practical implementation questions. Timelines tightened from years to months. Oversight provisions strengthened. By evening, a framework agreement had emerged that exceeded even Terrell's ambitious goals. Comprehensive reform with concrete metrics, independent oversight, significant resource reallocation, and most importantly, explicit acknowledgement that the previous system had discriminated against communities of color by design rather than by accident. As the final documents were being prepared for signatures, Commissioner Richardson approached Terrell privately. "You could have gone scorched earth," the commissioner observed, "destroyed careers, including mine. Why offer a path to reform instead?" Terrell considered the question carefully. Because this was never about punishment. It was about change. Real change requires partners willing to acknowledge past wrongs and commit to a different future. You've done that. The official signing ceremony took place 2 days later on the steps of City Hall. As Terrell approached the microphone to address the assembled press and public, he spotted his mother in the crowd, pride evident in her eyes. He also noticed Officer Miller standing with his family, Captain Stevens nearby, former adversaries now united in the difficult work of transformation. "What we announce today isn't the end of a lawsuit," Terrell began. "It's the beginning of a new approach to public safety, one that serves and protects all New Yorkers equally. The road ahead will be challenging. Institutional change always is. But today, we take the first step together." As applause rippled through the crowd, Terrell knew this victory wasn't just about policies or procedures. It was about something more fundamental. The acknowledgement that systems built on bias could be dismantled and rebuilt with justice at their center. 1 year after the landmark agreement, Terrell Mason stood in the auditorium of the police academy, addressing the newest class of recruits. The room looked markedly different from previous years. The demographic makeup of the cadets reflected New York's diversity in ways that past classes had not. "Your training has been different from those who came before you," Terrell told them. "You've studied implicit bias not as a theoretical concept, but as a practical challenge you'll face daily. You've learned de-escalation as a primary tool, not a fallback option. You've been taught that your success will be measured not by the number of arrests you make, but by the trust you build." The reforms had faced significant resistance during implementation. Veteran officers accustomed to the old metrics and methods had struggled to adapt. The police union had fought aspects of the agreement, particularly the enhanced civilian oversight provisions. Some officers had chosen early retirement rather than embrace the new approach. Yet the data after just 1 year showed promising trends. Civilian complaints down by 38%, use of force incidents reduced by 27%, and most significantly, community satisfaction with police interactions improved across all demographic groups. Officer Miller had been promoted to sergeant and now headed the department's new Community Accountability Division, where he worked closely with neighborhood leaders to ensure policing reflected community priorities. His initial ostracism had gradually given way to respect from many colleagues who recognized the courage his actions had required. Captain Stevens had taken a different path, accepting a position teaching ethics and community policing at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, where her first-hand experience with both problematic practices and institutional reform made her insights particularly valuable to the next generation of law enforcement professionals. Officer Jenkins had ultimately accepted a plea agreement that included community service and a permanent bar from law enforcement work. His cooperation with investigations had proven crucial in identifying and addressing structural problems within the department. For Terrell personally, the case had transformed his career. Williams and Hargrove had established a new civil rights division with him at the helm, taking on similar cases in police departments across the country. The New York model of reform was being studied and adapted by cities nationwide, creating a blueprint for institutional change. The most profound change, however, was in the daily lived experience of New Yorkers. Marvin Washington, a high school student from the Bronx, expressed it best during a community feedback session. Last year, walking home from basketball practice meant keeping my head down and hoping police wouldn't notice me. Now the officer on the corner knows my name and asks about my games. That's different. That matters. Not everything had been resolved. Institutional change proved to be a marathon rather than a sprint. Some precincts embraced reforms more enthusiastically than others. Training had to be continuously refined. Political winds still shifted, requiring constant vigilance to protect the progress made. Yet a fundamental shift had occurred, a recognition that public safety and equal treatment under the law were not competing values, but complementary ones. The new commissioner, a reform-minded veteran officer who had supported the changes from the beginning, had made this the department's official motto: justice and safety for all. As Terrell concluded his address to the recruits, he offered them the perspective that had guided his work from the beginning. The true measure of your success won't be statistics or commendations. It will be the child who sees you on the street and feels safer rather than afraid. It will be the grandmother who calls for help knowing she'll be treated with dignity. It will be the young man who doesn't have to wonder if the color of his skin will determine how you interact with him. That's the legacy you're inheriting and the responsibility you're accepting today. The reforms born from a single traffic stop had created ripples that continued to expand outward, touching lives in ways both measurable and profound. The work remained unfinished, but the path forward was clearer than it had ever been. 5 years later, Terrell pulled his car into the driveway of his mother's Bronx home for their traditional Sunday dinner. The neighborhood had changed over the decades, but she had steadfastly refused to move, remaining a beloved fixture in the community where she had raised him alone after his father's death. As he walked up the steps, he noticed a patrol car slowing near the house. The window rolled down and a young officer nodded respectfully. "Everything good, Mr. Mason?" she asked. "All good, Officer Rodriguez," he replied, recognizing her from a community meeting the previous month. This simple, cordial interaction represented the kind of change he had fought for. Officers who knew the neighborhoods they patrolled, who recognized residents as individuals deserving respect rather than as potential threats. Inside, his mother was setting the table, CNN playing quietly in the background. A segment about nationwide police reform efforts showed footage of Terrell speaking at a congressional hearing the previous week. "Look at you," she said, with a mix of pride and amusement. "My son," the expert witness. "Just trying to help other cities avoid reinventing the wheel," he replied, helping her carry dishes to the table. Over dinner, they discussed the ongoing work. The New York model had been adopted with local variations by 14 major cities. Not without challenges, Portland had faced significant resistance from their police association. Chicago was struggling with implementation in certain districts, but the framework was proving adaptable and effective. "Remember when you were 16, his mother said suddenly, and that officer stopped you walking home from the library? You were so angry when you got home." Terrell nodded, remembering the humiliation and fear of that encounter. Books spread on the sidewalk as he was searched without cause or explanation. "I told you then to channel that anger into something positive," she continued. "I had no idea it would lead to all this." After dinner, Terrell received an email from Alicia with a draft of their newest class action, this one targeting discriminatory banking practices that had systematically denied loans to minority business owners. The work continued to evolve, addressing interconnected systems that perpetuated inequality. That evening, driving back to his apartment, Terrell noticed a traffic stop in progress. Two officers were interacting with a young black driver. He slowed slightly, observational habits ingrained after years of civil rights work. What he saw made him smile slightly. Body cameras prominently displayed, respectful distance maintained, no hands near weapons, a supervisor present ensuring protocols were followed. Not perfect, perhaps, but markedly different from what would have occurred just a few years earlier. Systems change slowly, and vigilance would always be necessary to prevent backsliding. But watching the interaction conclude with a warning rather than an escalation, Terrell allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. This was what sustainable change looked like, not a single dramatic victory, but thousands of daily interactions transformed by institutional reform, training, accountability, and shifting cultural expectations. The work wasn't finished, it never would be, but it was progressing, one interaction at a time. If you've stayed with this story until now, I want to sincerely thank you for your time and attention. Stories like Terrell's, though fictional, reflect real challenges and possibilities in our society today. They remind us that individual courage, strategic action, and collective effort can create meaningful change in systems that may seem too entrenched to transform. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. What resonated with you? Did you connect with particular characters or moments? Are there aspects of police reform or social justice that you wish the story had explored more deeply? Your perspective enriches this conversation immensely. If you enjoyed this narrative, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore complex social issues through compelling characters and situations. Every subscription helps us create more content that matters. I'm curious, what city are you watching from? Our community spans the globe, and I'm always fascinated to see how these stories connect with people from different backgrounds and experiences. Drop your location in the comments below. For those who've connected with the themes of this story, you might enjoy our other videos exploring justice, institutional change, and individual courage in the face of systemic challenges. You'll find a video on the screen now about another powerful story of transformation and justice that I think you'll find equally compelling. The conversations these stories generate are just as important as the narratives themselves. By sharing your reactions, questions, and insights in the comments, you help create a community of thoughtful engagement around issues that matter deeply in our society today. If you watched all the way to the end, please comment "I watched until the final verdict," so I know you're one of our most dedicated viewers who stayed for the complete journey of this story. Your commitment to these longer narratives helps us continue creating content with depth and substance. The story of Terrell Mason may be fictional, but the issues it addresses are very real and present in communities across America and beyond. Each of us has a role to play in creating more just and equitable systems, whether through our professional work, community involvement, or simply how we treat others in our daily lives. Thank you again for being part of this storytelling journey. Until next time, remember that even the most entrenched systems can change when enough courageous individuals stand together for what's right.